Jake Martinez stood at his post near the main entrance of the diplomatic hall. His dark blue uniform was pressed and clean, but his face showed the tiredness of a long day. Around him, beings from dozens of different worlds moved through the corridors of Nexus 7, the largest space station in Alliance territory. The year was 2387, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Alliance for only 15 years. Most of the other species still looked down on humans as the new kids who did not belong. Jake knew this well. He had heard the whispers, seen the looks, felt the cold shoulders from alien diplomats who thought humans were too young and too weak to matter. Today was different, though. Today, the most dangerous enemy of the Alliance had come to talk peace. The Zephyrian Empire had been at war with the Alliance for over 50 years. Their ships were faster, their weapons stronger, and their soldiers feared nothing. But now, somehow they wanted to talk instead of fight. Jake checked his watch. The formal reception would start soon. He had been told to keep quiet, stand straight, and look professional. His job was simple: make sure no one caused trouble during the peace talks. But Jake had never been good at simple jobs. The main doors opened, and Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. The Zephyrian delegation entered the hall like a storm of silver and blue. Their leader, Emperor Thane, wore robes that seemed to shine with their own light. His face was hard as stone and his eyes showed no emotion at all. But it was not the Emperor that made Jake stare. Behind him, surrounded by 6 tall guards, walked the most beautiful being Jake had ever seen. Princess Lyrelai of the Zephyrian Empire moved like she was floating instead of walking. Her skin glowed with a soft silver light, and her long hair moved around her shoulders like liquid starlight. Her eyes were the color of deep blue ice, and when she looked around the room, Jake felt like she could see everything. The princess wore a dress that looked like it was made from the night sky itself. Dark fabric covered with tiny lights that twinkled like stars. She was tall, even for a Zephyrian, and she held her head high with royal pride. But something in her eyes looked tired, like she carried a heavy weight that no one else could see. Jake knew the stories about Princess Lyrelai. She was not just pretty decoration for the royal court. She was smart, maybe smarter than her uncle the Emperor. She spoke 12 languages, had studied the politics of every Alliance world, and some said she had more real power than anyone knew. But she was also completely untouchable. Zephyrian culture had strict rules about their royal family. No one could speak to the princess unless she spoke first. No one could touch her without permission. No one could even look at her for too long without her guards taking it as an insult. Many diplomats had tried to get close to her over the years, hoping to win her favor for their worlds. All of them had failed. Most had been lucky to escape with just a warning. As the reception began, Jake watched the careful dance of diplomacy. Alliance ambassadors bowed low when the princess walked by, but they never came closer than 10 feet. When they needed to speak with her, they talked to her guards or her advisors instead. The princess herself rarely spoke, and when she did, her voice was cold and formal. Jake could see how bored she looked. Her beautiful face showed no expression, but her eyes kept looking toward the big windows that showed the stars outside. Sometimes she would glance around the room like she was looking for something more interesting than another boring speech about trade agreements and border disputes. The talks were not going well. Jake could tell from the way the diplomats stood, the sharp words they used, and the long silences between them. The Alliance wanted the Zephyrians to stop attacking human colonies. The Zephyrians wanted the Alliance to give up 3 star systems that humans had been living in for decades. Neither side would give in. Admiral Lisa Parker, the leader of the human delegation, looked worried. She was a good leader and a smart woman, but Jake could see the stress in her eyes. Humanity needed this peace treaty more than anyone else. If the talks failed, the Zephyrians would probably attack Earth itself. Humanity's ships were no match for the Empire's fleet. As the evening went on, Jake noticed that Princess Lyrelai had slipped away from the main crowd. She stood alone on one of the observation decks, looking out at the stars through the massive windows. Her guards were nearby, but not too close, giving her some space to think. Jake knew he should stay at his post. He knew he should follow orders and not cause trouble. But something about the way the princess stood there, so alone despite being surrounded by hundreds of people, made him want to do something crazy. He had spent 3 years fighting Zephyrian ships on the border worlds. He had seen what their weapons could do, watched good friends die in battles against their forces. But looking at Princess Lyrelay now, she did not look like an enemy. She looked like someone who was as tired of war as he was. Jake made his choice. He left his post and walked toward the observation deck. Each step felt like he was walking toward his own death. The princess's guards would probably kill him before he could say a word, but something told him this was important, maybe more important than his own life. As he got closer, one of the guards noticed him. The alien warrior's hand moved to his weapon, and his strange eyes focused on Jake with deadly intent. But Jake kept walking. His heart was beating fast, but his steps were steady. Princess Lyrelay must have heard the guard's movement because she turned around. For a moment, her cold blue eyes met Jake's brown ones. Time seemed to stop. The noise from the reception faded away. The whole universe seemed to hold its breath. Jake stopped a few feet away from her and did something that no one had ever done before. He smiled at the most dangerous and untouchable woman in the galaxy and said in a calm, friendly voice, "Good evening, Your Highness. My name is Jake Martinez. I was wondering if you might like some company while you look at the stars." The guards reached for their weapons. Diplomats nearby gasped in shock. But Princess Lyrelay raised her hand and everyone froze. For the first time in years, someone had surprised her. The silence stretched like a tight wire ready to snap. 6 Zephyrian guards had their weapons half drawn, waiting for their princess to give the order to kill the foolish human. Nearby, diplomats watched in horror, expecting to see Jake Martinez become the shortest-lived soldier in Alliance history. But Princess Lyrelay did not give that order. Instead, she studied Jake's face with those ice-blue eyes. She saw something there that she had not seen in years of diplomatic meetings. He was not afraid of her. He was not trying to use her for political gain. He was just a young man who thought she might be lonely, standing by herself and looking at the stars. "You may lower your weapons," she said to her guards in the musical, Zephyrian language. They looked confused but obeyed instantly. Then she turned back to Jake and spoke in perfect English. "You are either very brave or very stupid, Staff Sergeant Martinez." Jake was surprised she knew his rank, but he tried not to show it. "My friends usually say I'm a little bit of both, Your Highness." Something almost like a smile touched the corner of her mouth. "Your friends are probably right." She turned back toward the window. "You may stand here, but do not try to touch me. My guards would kill you before I could stop them, even if I wanted to." Jake moved to stand beside her, keeping a respectful distance. Through the huge window, they could see dozens of ships from different worlds, human vessels with their blocky, practical design, elegant Corvin ships that looked like flying art pieces, and in the distance, the dark, powerful shapes of Zephyrian warships. "It's beautiful out there," Jake said softly. "All those different ships, all those different peoples, trying to find a way to live together in peace." "Peace." The princess repeated the word like she was tasting something bitter. Such a simple word for such a complicated thing. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Jake noticed that up close the princess's silver skin had tiny patterns in it, like frost on a window. Her hair really did move like it was underwater, even though there was no wind inside the station. But what surprised him most was that she seemed younger than he had expected, not much older than his own 25 years. "Why did you approach me?" she asked suddenly. "Do you not know what happens to people who break protocol with the royal family?" Jake thought about his answer carefully. "I know the stories. But I also saw you standing here alone, and you looked like you might want someone to talk to. Sometimes taking a risk is worth it if you might help someone else feel less alone." Princess Lyrelay turned to look at him again. This time her expression was different, softer somehow. "In my culture, no one has spoken to me so casually since I was a child. Everyone either fears me or wants something from me. Even my own advisors speak to me like I am made of glass that might break if they say the wrong thing." That sounds pretty lonely, Jake said. It is. The words came out so quietly that Jake almost missed them. Then she seemed to remember who she was and straightened her shoulders, but that is the price of royal blood and political power. Over the next hour, they talked about many things. Jake told her about Earth, about the blue skies and green trees that she had never seen. He talked about human music and art, about the way humans could find beauty in simple things like a sunset or a child's laughter. Princess Lyrelei listened with interest that seemed genuine. In return, she told him about her world. Zephyria was a planet of crystal cities and silver seas. The people lived long lives and valued logic above emotion. They had built an empire that stretched across 50 star systems, but they had lost something along the way. The ability to create art that touched the heart. The willingness to take risks for love instead of just power. We have become very good at surviving, she said, but I sometimes wonder if we have forgotten how to truly live. Jake was about to answer when Admiral Parker appeared beside them. The older woman's face was tight with worry and anger. Staff, Sergeant Martinez, you need to return to your post immediately. Admiral, you were just risking not only your own life but the lives of everyone on this station, Admiral Parker said in a sharp whisper. The Zephyrian delegation is already upset about the negotiations. We cannot afford to insult their princess. Princess Lyrelei spoke before Jake could answer. Admiral Parker, Staff Sergeant Martinez has shown me nothing but respect. In fact, he has given me a new perspective on humanity that I find quite valuable. The Admiral looked surprised. Your Highness, I apologize if he has bothered you in... Anyway, he has not bothered me at all. In fact, I would like to continue our conversation tomorrow if he is available. Admiral Parker's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. This was not how things were supposed to work. Royalty did not request meetings with common soldiers, especially not from species they were supposed to be enemies with. Yes, Your Highness, if that is your wish. After the Admiral left looking very confused, Princess Lyrelei turned back to Jake. I hope you will come back tomorrow. It has been many years since I had a conversation that was not about politics or war. Jake smiled. I'll be here, Your Highness. Same time? Yes. And Jake? It was the first time she had used his first name. Please, when we are alone like this, call me Lyrelei. I would like to remember what it feels like to be just a person instead of a princess, even for a little while. The next evening, Jake returned to the observation deck. This time, Princess Lyrelei was waiting for him. Her guards still watched them carefully, but they seemed less ready to kill him on sight. Progress, Jake thought. I brought something for you, Jake said, pulling out his personal tablet. You said yesterday that Zephyrians don't create much art anymore. I thought you might like to see some human art. For the next 2 hours, Jake showed her human paintings, played her human music, and read her poems written by people who had lived centuries before. Princess Lyrelei was fascinated by everything. She asked dozens of questions about why humans created these things, what they meant, how they made people feel. This one, she said, pointing to a painting of a woman holding a child. It makes me feel something strange inside, like sadness and joy mixed together. That's called being moved by art, Jake explained. It happens when something touches your heart in a way that your mind can't quite explain. Hearts, she said thoughtfully. Humans talk about hearts a lot. You say someone has a good heart or a broken heart, or that they should follow their heart. We have hearts too, of course, but we think of them as just organs that pump blood. For humans, the heart is where feelings live, Jake said. It's the part of us that loves and hopes and dreams even when logic says we shouldn't. Princess Lyrelei was quiet for a long time. I think I might have a heart like that, she said finally. I have been feeling things lately that do not make logical sense, things that go against my training and my duty. Jake wanted to ask what she meant, but he could see that she was struggling with something important. He decided to wait and let her speak when she was ready. Jake, she said at last, there is something I must tell you. In 3 days, My uncle plans to announce my engagement to Lord Theron of the Zephyrian noble houses. It is a political marriage, designed to strengthen our empire's power structure. Jake felt something cold and heavy settle in his stomach. Do you love him? Love? She laughed, but it was not a happy sound. Love is not considered important in royal marriages. Lord Theron is powerful, wealthy, and loyal to the Empire. That is supposed to be enough. But is it enough for you? Princess Lyrelai looked out at the stars for a long time before answering. 3 days ago I would have said yes. Duty to the Empire was the only thing that mattered. But now? She turned to look at Jake, and her eyes were bright with tears that she was trying not to shed. Now I have tasted what it feels like to talk to someone who sees me as a person first and a princess second. Now I know what it means to have your heart moved by beauty instead of just your mind moved by logic. How can I go back to a life without these things? Jake felt his own heart breaking for her. He wanted to tell her to run away, to choose freedom over duty. But he knew it was not that simple. She was not just a person. She was the key to peace between their peoples. Her choices affected millions of lives. I'm sorry, was all he could say. I wish things could be different. So do I, she whispered. So do I. 3 days passed like a dream that was slowly turning into a nightmare. Each evening, Jake met Princess Lyrelai on the observation deck. Each evening, their conversations grew deeper and their connection stronger. And each evening, the weight of her coming engagement hung over them like a dark cloud. Jake found himself thinking about her constantly. When he was supposed to be watching the corridors for trouble, he was remembering the way her eyes lit up when she laughed at one of his stories. When he was supposed to be sleeping, he lay awake, thinking about how sad she looked when she talked about her future marriage to a man she did not love. He knew he was falling for her, and he knew it was hopeless. She was alien royalty, and he was just a human soldier. Their worlds were still technically at war. Even if they had been the same species, their different social positions would have made any relationship impossible. But knowing something and feeling it were two different things, and Jake's heart did not care about logic. Princess Lyrelai was changing too. Jake could see it in the way she held herself, the way she spoke to her advisors, the way she looked at the world around her. The cold, formal mask she had always worn was starting to slip, and underneath it was a young woman who was discovering what it meant to have feelings. I have been reading about human emotions, she told him on their third evening together. You have so many words for different kinds of love. Romantic love, family love, love for friends, love for ideas. In Zephyrian, we have only one word for love, and it is rarely used. What's the word? Jake asked. She said something in her musical language that sounded like wind chimes. It means deep loyalty that goes beyond logic. But I think human love is something more than that. Something that makes people willing to suffer for each other, to sacrifice for each other, even to die for each other. Jake nodded. Sometimes love makes people do crazy things, things that don't make sense to anyone else but feel right to the people doing them. Like a human soldier talking to an alien princess when he knows it might get him killed. Their eyes met, and Jake felt something electric pass between them. Yeah, he said softly. Like that. Meanwhile, the peace talks were getting worse instead of better. Each day brought new arguments, new demands, new threats. The Zephyrians wanted the Alliance to give up 3 entire star systems where humans had been living for generations. The Alliance wanted the Zephyrians to stop attacking human ships and colonies. Neither side would budge. Admiral Parker was getting more worried every day. Jake could see the stress lines around her eyes, the way she snapped at people who would normally never hear a harsh word from her. The truth was that humanity needed this peace treaty desperately. Human ships were no match for Zephyrian technology. If the talks failed and war started again, Earth itself might not survive. Jake knew that Princess Lyrelai was just as worried about the talks as anyone else. She had real political power in the Empire, and she wanted peace as much as the humans did. But she was fighting battles on 2 fronts, trying to convince her uncle's war council to accept compromise while also dealing with the pressure to marry Lord Theron. They announced my engagement this morning, she told Jake on their fourth evening together. Her voice was calm, but Jake could see the pain in her eyes. The wedding will take place in 2 weeks, immediately after these talks conclude. How do you feel about that? Jake asked, though he could guess the answer. Like a bird that has just discovered it has wings, only to be told it must spend the rest of its life in a cage. She turned away from him to look out at the stars. Lord Theron is not a bad man, but he is cold. He sees me as a useful political tool, nothing more. Our marriage will strengthen both our families' positions in the Empire, and that is all that matters to him. Jake wanted to reach out and comfort her, but he knew he could not. Even the smallest touch would bring her guards down on him instantly. What do you want, Lyra Lay? Not what your family wants, not what's good for the Empire. What do you want? She was quiet for so long that Jake thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I want to know what it feels like to be loved for who I am, not what I represent. I want to make choices based on my heart instead of my duty. I want to wake up next to someone who makes me laugh instead of someone who sees me as a political asset. You could have those things, Jake said carefully. Maybe not the way you expected, but no, she said firmly. I could not. Even if I were willing to give up everything, my title, my family, my world, where would I go? Who would accept a Zephyrian princess who abandoned her duties? And what about the peace talks? If I disappear, my uncle's war council will use it as an excuse to attack your people. Millions could die because I chose personal happiness over responsibility. Jake knew she was right, but it still hurt to hear. So, you're just going to marry him? Live a life that makes you miserable? What choice do I have? Her voice broke slightly on the words. This is what it means to be born royal. Personal desires must always come second to the greater good. That night, Jake could not sleep. He kept thinking about what Princess Lyrelai had said, about duty and sacrifice and the greater good. He understood her position, but it seemed wrong that someone so intelligent and caring should have to give up any chance at happiness just because of the circumstances of her birth. He also could not stop thinking about the peace talks. They were failing, and everyone knew it. In a few more days, the negotiations would end, and both sides would go back to their war fleets. Humanity would face destruction, and Princess Lyrali would face a loveless marriage to seal political alliances. There had to be another way. Some solution that could save both the peace talks and the woman he was falling in love with. But what could one human soldier do that experienced diplomats could not? The answer came to him during the next day's negotiation session. Jake was standing guard at the back of the room, watching the same arguments play out for the 100th time. Emperor Thane sat rigid in his chair, surrounded by advisors who whispered about military strength and strategic advantages. Admiral Parker and the other alliance leaders looked tired and defeated, but Jake was watching Princess Lyrelai. She sat beside her uncle, officially silent as royal protocol demanded. But Jake could see the frustration in her eyes, the way her hands clenched in her lap when someone said something particularly stupid. She had ideas, he realized. She had solutions that no one was asking for because she was expected to be decoration rather than a real participant. That was when Jake understood something important. The negotiations were failing not because the two sides could not find common ground, but because the wrong people were doing the talking. The old men making decisions cared more about pride and power than about peace. But some of the younger generation on both sides wanted something different. What if someone could prove that humans and Zephyrians were not so different after all? What if someone could show that the strongest bonds between people could cross the lines of species and culture? What if someone was willing to risk everything to demonstrate that love was more powerful than fear? It was a crazy idea. It would probably get him killed, and might make everything worse instead of better. But Jake had never been good at playing it safe, and desperate times called for desperate measures. He started making plans. The final day of negotiations arrived with the weight of impending doom. Jake could feel the tension in every corridor of Nexus 7. Diplomats walked with hunched shoulders and worried faces. Security personnel checked their weapons more often than usual. Everyone knew that when the talks ended today, War would begin tomorrow. In the Great Assembly Hall, representatives from dozens of worlds had gathered to witness either the signing of a historic peace treaty or the final breakdown of diplomacy. The atmosphere was so thick with stress that Jake felt like he could cut it with a knife. Emperor Thane entered the hall with his full retinue, including Princess Lyrelay. She looked beautiful but distant in her formal robes, every inch the untouchable royal princess. But Jake had learned to read the subtle signs of her emotions. The slight tension around her eyes told him she was as worried as everyone else. Admiral Parker took her place at the Alliance table, flanked by representatives from a dozen species. The Corvins, tall and proud, sat with their hands near their ceremonial weapons. The Deltari delegation whispered among themselves in their buzzing language. Everyone was trying to look confident, but Jake could see the fear underneath. The Emperor's chief advisor, a stern old Zephyrian named Lord Kane, stood to address the assembly. His voice carried the cold authority of the Empire as he laid out their final demands. Give up the 3 disputed star systems. Remove all human colonies from traditional Zephyrian territory. Accept permanent restrictions on human ship movements near the Empire's borders. Jake watched Princess Lyrelay's face as the demands were read. Her expression never changed, but he saw her fingers clench slightly. She knew these terms were impossible for the Alliance to accept. She also knew what would happen when they were rejected. Admiral Parker stood to give the Alliance response. Her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the sadness in it. The Alliance cannot accept these terms. We cannot abandon millions of our people to preserve a peace that would exist in name only. If the Empire insists on these demands, then we have no choice but to prepare for the consequences. A murmur went through the hall. This was it. The moment when diplomacy died and war was reborn. Jake felt his heart pounding as he prepared to do something that would either save everything or destroy it all. But before he could move, Princess Lyrelay did something unexpected. She stood up from her seat, breaking every rule of royal protocol. Her uncle turned to stare at her in shock, and the entire hall fell silent. "If I may speak," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden quiet. Emperor Thane looked angry at his niece's breach of protocol, but he could not humiliate her in front of so many witnesses. "You may speak briefly, Princess." Lyrelay walked to the center of the hall, directly between the 2 negotiating tables. In her formal robes with her silver skin glowing softly, she looked like a figure from legend. When she spoke, her words were careful and diplomatic, but Jake could hear the passion underneath them. Honored representatives of both the Empire and the Alliance, I have listened to these negotiations for many days. I have heard much talk of territory and resources, of strategic advantages and military strength, but I have heard very little talk of what truly matters, the lives of the people we claim to serve. She turned to address her uncle directly. "Uncle, you speak of Zephyrian honor and the glory of our empire. But what honor is there in condemning our young people to die in battles over empty space? What glory comes from ruling over ashes instead of living worlds?" Then she turned to the Alliance table. "And you, honored Alliance representatives, speak of defending your people and protecting your colonies. But are your people not better served by peace than by a war that could destroy entire worlds?" Jake watched in amazement as Princess Lyrelay spoke from her heart instead of from a prepared script. She talked about the waste of war, about the potential for cooperation between species, about the future they could build together instead of the destruction they were choosing. "I have spent time these past days learning about human culture," she said, and Jake felt his pulse quicken. "I have discovered that humans have a saying. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. For 50 years, our peoples have chosen conflict over cooperation. Perhaps it is time to try something different." Her words were eloquent and passionate, but Jake could see they were not enough. The older delegates were nodding politely, but their minds were already made up. Lord Caney looked openly annoyed that the princess had dared to speak at all. Even Emperor Thane seemed unmoved by his niece's plea. That was when Jake made his choice. He left his post at the back of the hall and walked forward. Every step felt like it took forever. Security personnel from multiple species noticed his movement, but something about his calm determination kept them from stopping him immediately. Princess Lyrelei saw him coming, and her eyes widened with understanding and fear. She knew what he was about to do, and she knew it would change everything. "Jake," she whispered. "No." But Jake kept walking until he stood directly in front of her, in full view of every delegate, every advisor, every guard in the hall. The silence was so complete that he could hear his own heartbeat. "Your Highness," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I need to tell you something important before it's too late." Guards from both sides were reaching for their weapons now, but Jake ignored them. He looked directly into Princess Lyrelei's beautiful blue eyes and spoke the words that had been building in his heart for days. "I've learned something during our talks together. I've learned that courage isn't just about fighting battles or following orders. Real courage is about being willing to be vulnerable, to open your heart even when you know it might be broken. Real courage is choosing love over fear, hope over despair, and connection over division." The hall erupted in shocked gasps and angry shouts as Jake reached up and gently placed his hands on either side of Princess Lyrelei's face. She could have pulled away. She could have called for her guards. She could have stopped what was about to happen. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her silver skin glowing brighter with emotion. "I love you, Lyrelei," Jake said softly. But in the perfect silence of the hall, everyone heard every word. "Not because you're a princess, not because you're beautiful, not because you have political power. I love you because of the way you laugh at my terrible jokes, because you care more about peace than glory, because you have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met." Before anyone could react, before the guards could shoot, before the diplomats could protest, Jake leaned forward and kissed Princess Lyrelei. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but in those moments, the entire political landscape of the galaxy shifted. Jake felt the princess kiss him back, felt her hands come up to rest on his chest, felt her silver skin grow warm under his touch. Around them, chaos erupted. Zephyrian guards shouted orders in their musical language. Alliance security. Personnel drew their weapons. Diplomats from a dozen species were on their feet, some shouting in outrage, others staring in amazement. But Jake and Princess Lyrelei were lost in their own world, experiencing the first and possibly last moment of pure love either of them would ever know. When they finally separated, Princess Lyrelei's eyes were bright with tears, and her whole body was glowing with the physiological response that every Zephyrian recognized as deep, genuine emotion. She looked at Jake with wonder and terror and love all mixed together. "What have you done?" she whispered. "What I had to do," Jake replied. "What my heart told me was right, even if my head knew it was crazy." That was when Emperor Thane's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Guards, arrest that human. He will die for this insult to the royal family." But as the guards moved toward Jake, Princess Lyrelei stepped between them. Her own guards stopped in confusion. They could not harm their princess, but they could not get to Jake without going through her. "Uncle," she said, her voice ringing with new strength, "this man has shown me something that all your advisors and all your political marriages never could. He has shown me what it means to be valued for who I am rather than what I represent." Shiko turned to face the entire assembly. Her royal bearing returned, but somehow different now. "If you kill him for loving me, you will have to kill me too. Because I love him back, and I will not pretend otherwise to preserve anyone's political convenience." The hall fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of shock rather than anticipation. A Zephyrian princess had just declared her love for a human soldier in front of representatives from across the galaxy. Nothing like this had ever happened before, and no one knew what to do next. Emperor Thane stared at his niece with an expression Jake could not read. Fury? Disappointment? Calculation? Maybe all three. Finally, the Emperor spoke. "Remove the human to holding cells. We will discuss his fate later. Princess, you will return to your quarters immediately." As Jake was led away by guards, he looked back once at Princess Lyrelei. She was watching him go with tears streaming down her face, but her expression was not one of regret. For the first time since he had known her, she looked truly free. Jake sat in his prison cell and waited to die. The Zephyrian holding area was clean and efficient like everything else about their technology, but it was still a cage. Through the energy barrier that served as his cell door, he could see guards, posted at regular intervals. None of them looked at him directly, but he could feel their hatred like heat from a fire. He had been there for 6 hours when Admiral Parker arrived. The older woman's face was a mixture of anger, worry, and something that might have been admiration. She stood outside his cell for a long moment before speaking. "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest," she said finally. "Maybe both," Jake replied. "How bad is it out there?" "Bad. The Zephyrian delegation is furious. Half of them want you executed immediately, and the other half want you tortured first. The Alliance representatives don't know what to think. Some are calling you a hero, others are saying you've doomed us all." Jake nodded. He had expected as much. "What about Princess Lyra Lee?" Admiral Parker's expression softened slightly. "Confined to quarters under heavy guard. The Emperor is furious with her, but she's family, so he can't just execute her like he, can you?" "The peace talks?" "Over. Finished. The Emperor declared them a failure and ordered his ships to prepare for departure. War fleets on both sides are already moving into position." Admiral Parker paused, then added quietly, "I should be angry with you for destroying our last chance at peace. But somehow I can't bring myself to be. What you did it was something special." After she left, Jake tried not to think about the war that was coming. He tried not to think about the human colonies that would be destroyed, the ships that would be lost, the friends who would die. Instead, he thought about Princess Lyrelai's face when he kissed her, the way her skin had glowed with genuine emotion, the joy in her eyes even as tears ran down her cheeks. If he was going to die, at least he would die knowing that for one perfect moment, he had made the woman he loved happy. But as the hours passed, Jake began to hear strange sounds from outside his cell. Footsteps in the corridors, but not the measured pace of guards. Voices speaking in urgent whispers, but not the formal tones of officials. Something was happening, something the guards had not expected. Then the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in dim red light. Alarms began to sound, and Jake could hear running footsteps and shouted orders. His cell's energy barrier flickered and died, and suddenly he was free. A figure appeared in his doorway, not a guard, but a young Zephyrian in civilian clothes. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, I am here to help you escape." "Who are you?" Jake asked, not moving from his place on the cell's narrow bench. "My name is Valen. I work in the Palace Communications Center. Princess Lyra Lee sent me." Jake still did not move. This could be a trap. Why would you help a human? The young Zephyrian's silver skin flushed with what Jake was learning to recognize as embarrassment. Because what you did today was the bravest thing I have ever seen. You risked everything for love, and the princess glowed brighter than I have ever seen a Zephyrian glow. You made her happy, and that is something none of us has been able to do in years. That convinced Jake more than any logical argument could have. He stood up and followed Valen into the corridor. They moved quickly through maintenance passages and service tunnels that the young Zephyrian seemed to know well. Behind them, Jake could hear guards discovering his empty cell and raising the alarm. "Where are we going?" Jake whispered as they climbed through a narrow shaft. "To the princess. She is waiting for you." They emerged in what looked like a storage room filled with communication equipment. Princess Lyra Lee was there, but she looked different than Jake had ever seen her. Instead of formal robes, she wore simple traveling clothes. Her hair was pulled back in a practical style, and she carried a small bag over her shoulder. When she saw Jake, her face lit up with relief and joy. Before her watching guards could react, she ran to him and threw her arms around his neck. Jake held her close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair and feeling the warmth of her skin against his. "I thought they were going to kill you," she whispered against his neck. "They still might," Jake said. "Lyrelai, what's happening here?" She pulled back to look at him, and Jake was surprised to see determination in her eyes, instead of fear. I am leaving, Jake. I am giving up my title, my position, my world. I cannot marry Lord Theron and pretend to be happy when I know what real love feels like. But the peace talks, your responsibilities, are being taken care of, Princess, Lyrelay said firmly. I have sent messages to every young noble family in the Empire, to every junior officer in the fleet, to every citizen who has grown tired of endless war. I told them what happened today, what we felt, what we proved. She led him to a wall screen that showed news feeds from across Zephyrian space. Jake watched in amazement as he saw crowds of young Zephyrians gathering in city squares, holding signs that showed his face and Princess Lyrelay's together. The signs had words in Zephyrian script that he could not read, but Valen translated. Love conquers fear, Valen said softly. Unity over division, hearts before politics. They are protesting the war, demanding peace. It is not just Zephyrians, Princess Lyrelay said, switching the display to show Alliance worlds. Young humans are demonstrating too, calling you a hero, demanding that their leaders find a way to make peace work. Jake stared at the screens, in disbelief. His simple act of love had somehow sparked a movement across two civilizations. Young people who had grown tired of their parents' wars were standing up and demanding something better. The Emperor? Jake asked. Princess Lyrelay's expression grew serious, under enormous pressure. The old Warhawks and his council want to crush the protests and execute both of us as examples. But he is not stupid. He can see which way the political wind is blowing. As if summoned by her words, the door to their hiding place opened, and Emperor Thane entered with only 2 guards. Jake immediately stepped in front of Princess Lyrelay, ready to protect her even though he had no weapons and no chance of winning. But the Emperor raised his hand peacefully. I am not here to arrest anyone, Staff Sergeant Martinez. I am here to talk. Uncle, Princess Lyrelay said, moving to stand beside Jake. I will not change my mind. I love him and I will not apologize for that. Emperor Thane studied them both for a long moment. Jake was surprised to see that the ruler looked tired rather than angry. You know, Lyrelay, you remind me of your mother. She was just as stubborn about following her heart instead of her head. Mother married for love, Princess Lyrelay said quietly. She told me so before she died. Yes, she did. And I have spent 20 years regretting that I did not support her choice more strongly. The Emperor sighed. The political situation has become complicated. Half my council wants you both executed, but the other half is telling me that killing you would turn you into martyrs and make the protests worse. Jake found his voice. What do you want from us, Your Majesty? I want to offer you a choice, Emperor Thane said. I could have you both executed, but that would probably start a civil war. I could have you imprisoned, but that would accomplish the same thing, or... He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Or I could pardon you both and announce a new policy of cultural exchange between our peoples. Let this incident become a symbol of cooperation instead of defiance. Let your love story become the foundation for a new kind of peace treaty. Jake and Princess Lyrelay looked at each other in amazement. You would do that? She asked. I would do it because it serves the Empire's interests, Emperor Thane said firmly. The war has cost us too much already, and these protests are showing me that our young people want something different. Perhaps it is time to listen to them. He turned to Jake. You would become the first human to marry into Zephyrian royalty. It would not be an easy life. Many of my people would never accept you, but you would also become a bridge between our civilizations. And I would keep my title? Princess Lyrelay asked, a modified version of it. You would be Princess Lyrelay Martinez, Ambassador of Cultural Exchange. Your job would be to help our peoples understand each other better. Jake felt his heart pounding with hope and disbelief. And the peace treaty? Will be signed tomorrow, Emperor Thane said. With much better terms for both sides, negotiated by people who actually want peace instead of victory. 6 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the newly renamed Nexus 7 Peace Station, now called Unity Station. Through the huge windows, he could see ships from dozens of worlds coming and going in harmony. Human vessels worked alongside Zephyrian ships, and crews from both civilizations had begun serving together on joint missions. Princess Lyrelai joined him at the window, as she had so many times before. But now she wore a simple wedding ring, along with her royal jewelry, and when she looked at him, her silver skin glowed with the warm light of contentment. "Any regrets?" she asked, leaning against his shoulder. Jake wrapped his arms around his wife and thought about everything that had changed since that first night when he had dared to approach an untouchable alien princess. The war was over. Peace was flourishing. Young people from both civilizations were falling in love, creating art together, building a future that neither species